start off with the Pledge of Allegiance today. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
Roll call.
Lorraine Cox.
Here.
Charles Venuto.
Here.
John Lusnar.
Here.
Vinnie Toronto.
Here.
John Windsor.
Here.
Terry Casto.
Here.
David Lane.
Here.
Laura Lee Thompson.
Here.
Stephanie Ely. Melissa Martin.
Here.
Courtney Barker is asked to be excused. Todd Swingle.
Here.
Dennis Basile.
Present.
Danielle Bowden.
Here.
Okay, we are seeking a motion for the approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve?
Do you,
Second.
wait, excuse me, point of order.
Sure.
Do we want to make amendments to the agenda?
Amendments to what?
The agenda. I wanted to add as 6D, Cone Road project video.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. We are, a couple of amendments to today's agenda. We're going to add the keynote address under 6C is going to be 30 minutes instead of the normal 15. We may take a restroom break before that, depends on where we're at. And there will be a short video of the Cone Road project, which is really exciting. It's right where I grew up, between item 6C and item 6D. And that's just about a 2-minute video. And if there's going to be any discussion today about the workshop from yesterday, that'll be under item 10, under final comments, please. So refrain from making comments until that time. Okay.
So, do I amend my motion? Or take it back?
We
So-
can, let's have a motion to approve the agenda as it's
Okay.
written and as I just amended it.
Okay, so a motion to approve the agenda with the aforementioned changes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries. And we need a motion to approve the minutes from last month's meeting.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we've got that out of the way. We're going to move to our monthly progress and fiscal report presented by the esteemed Virginia Barker.
Thank you. So the first thing on the list, we finally have a 2019 plan update approved by the County Commission as recommended by the Citizens Oversight Committee at your last meeting, and I just passed out the clerk's memo documenting that board decision. You will note that there was some other board discussion during that item that is not included in the clerk's memo, so that there wasn't any motion associated with that other discussion and direction. So I'm sure that is important to different commissioners, but it wasn't an official motion. So we can figure out how you want to address that. You can talk about it under 10 if anybody wants to, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more when we get into the 2020 update as well. This month was very busy preparing for yesterday's board workshop. Thank you to all the committee members who attended and spoke and watched, and I'm sure there'll be some more discussion about that. We met with the Education Outreach and Engagement firm, MTN, and they've proposed some really great ideas, and I'm scheduling a meeting with the county manager to go over some of that, and then I would like to have them on your agenda next month to present their ideas and get this engagement campaign off and running. The beaches, leaking laterals, we sent we have a grant program to fund the repairs of those leaky laterals. We sent certified mail to each of the 30 people with broken laterals, telling them that we have this grant program, please contact us. 3 people responded. We're also trying to monitor the groundwater while the pipes are broken, and then monitor them after they're repaired. And so we had tasked Applied Ecology with that, but obviously they need permission to get onto those private properties. And with only 3 people saying yes, is that even a valid sample size? So they asked if they could start going door to door, if they could work harder to try to pull people in. So we amended our task order. Our numbers are now up to 3 people have already made their repairs, and 6 people are interested in the grant program. They're going to go door to door again this weekend and see if, and there's for sale signs in front of those houses, so it's just, it's amazing how difficult it is to give people money to fix their problems to help our lagoon.
Question.
Yes.
So there was some sort of bill, I think it was in the House, that would require, if your laterals have been smoke tested, that you would have to reveal that, and they were leaking, you'd have to reveal that in sale. Do you know the status of that?
I do not.
Okay.
Find out. Yes, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, if the homeowner knows there's a problem, they've got to disclose that, or they've got themselves at risk for a lawsuit after the closing when they get told about it later.
And that's currently? Yes,
Yeah,
currently.
it's not
Okay.
law, it's
Regular
case law.
disclosure.
It's case law is what it is.
It's not specific to laterals, right?
Oh, no, it's anything
Anything.
anything hidden or not possibly disclosed by just looking at it.
Right.
Dennis and Danielle, have you ever seen that on a disclosure?
Leaking lateral line?
Or,
I've seen bad septic tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get all types of stuff. Disclosures are standard and common and customary. It's something that should be, if the realtor knows about it, they're probably pushing if it's for sale, they're probably pushing their buyer their seller to disclose.
Also, if a realtor knows about it, they have to disclose by law.
Right.
Well, by our real estate code of ethics.
Right.
typically though, what you're going to see disclosed is just a bum septic tank or something like that?
No, you're going to disclose whatever you see that's hidden, that they might know about. I mean, we see termite disclosures that are hidden in walls. We see, leaky problems, roof leaks, all types of things. It's not just, we're not just talking about sewer and water or that sort of thing.
I was thinking that if that were ever to get any traction on some type of actionable offense for leaky laterals or cleanouts that weren't functioning or were broken off or something, that there could be a mechanism at the time, if there wasn't an ordinance or some type of actionable item while the homeowner is in the house, when it comes up for sale, there could be something required at the time the
Yeah,
property
it's called
changes
they won't
hands.
get financing for the buyer. It won't happen. It will get fixed at closing if it's identified.
Well, we have regulation for financing for a lot of septic things with VA and FHA, but I don't know of any regulation for lateral lines with financing.
I don't think it's a reg. I think there isn't anybody that's going to buy a house that's been told that they've got a lateral line that's cracked. They're just not going to do it, and the lender probably won't make the loan.
I just wonder what the rate of disclosing that information really is. It's, we're talking about pipes underground. It's easy to fail to disclose,
I think there's a lot of people that are unaware
Yeah,
as a whole.
fail to know is what I would,
Todd?
yeah, if they don't know, they can't disclose it.
Levels of impact on these, because there are many around that might have a crack and that would show smoke, but that will not have any sort of impact on the house. That the break or the deficiency is such that
it's just not impacting the performance of the house, and they may or may, it's likely they'll never see
Yeah,
it.
unless they have a backup.
So, unless they have a
It's out of
backup.
sight, out of mind.
I
so.
just had one in Melbourne Beach, and there's roots filling in the holes,
Yep.
and the homeowner had no idea. There's no backup. It's functioning as far as everyone knew. The house was older than 1975, therefore we suggested that the cast iron be scoped, and the scope found that everywhere there's a hole, there's a root plugging the hole.
How did that even come about, though? If there was no problem,
I suggested
oh,
it.
you just suggested we
She
scoped the
knows.
line,
Yes,
and at your suggestion, they agreed to pay for it and all of that, and,
yes.
okay,
That's not normal, I'll tell you that.
yeah.
And you can be very persuasive.
Maybe those homeowners are not there at the house. And if there's a lot of for sale signs, maybe contacting the realtor for maybe an out-of-state homeowner would work.
And just bear in mind, too, there are there are plenty of rules in place already. So broken cleanouts, broken laterals, in general, a utility can enforce that if they would so choose right now, because almost every utility and almost every municipal government already has a ordinance that prohibits introduction of stormwater into their sewer system. So we can pass all the laws we want, but until we put systems in place that both are supportive of homeowners to get things done, because these are big dollars, and they can be. Laterals are often manageable. You get into other sewer issues, they can be big dollars. But until we have a place that both supports homeowners and deals with enforcement, this is not a lack of law issue. There are plenty of regulatory approaches that can be utilized, but it is the challenge that we have, that every person is a participant in this, because every single one of you contributes something to this every day, multiple times a day probably. And so that's the challenge. You have a limited number of entities trying to deal with a issue that is truly a very broad community issue and need. So it's hard.
Dan, how much did it cost? How much did it cost to scope that line? Do you know?
The average cost runs between $250 and $300.
And you hire a plumber for that?
There are some inspectors that do the scope, and there are plumbers that absolutely do the scope.
And they just go right down the toillet and out, or they go to the clean out?
They go through the smokestacks or clean out.
Okay, the vent stacks, okay.
Vent stacks or clean out.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
And
Oh, go ahead, Melissa.
And I should notate that this one had the house to street replaced, but nothing under slab replaced. And it's $12,000 to get everything
Right.
under slab,
Oh, yeah.
where the house to street had been replaced. So, $12,000, and that doesn't include putting everything back. That's just going under slab.
Melissa, did you want to say
Oh,
something?
yeah, I'm just learning here. Can we use enforcement as a tool of education to help bring people to the awareness of these dollars available?
So in our notification, we included the regulation that says you can't let anything but sewer into your sewer pipes. So we told them there is a stick.
Okay.
We just don't like carrots.
All right, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Virginia.
All right, skipping down to Grand Canal muck dredging. The protest period is over and our financial review is underway. We're scheduling the review committee, and then the contract with Gator Dredging will have to go to the county commission at one of their meetings in May, and then hopefully that project will begin. Derelict vessels, we have an additional $450,000 approved. 3/4 of that is from the county general fund. 1/4 of that is TDC match from the $1 million set aside per year for the Lagoon. And we have so far in the current contract removed 10 derelict vessels. They were They just pulled one of those big boats on the shoreline in Cocoa. The other one is next.
How many boats will that remove? 450,000? Do you know?
Several dozen. It
Oh.
depends on the size of the boats and how sunk they are in the mud and how much they're falling apart and how big they are and how heavy they are and lots of variables.
But it's definitely in the thousands per boat.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
even tens of
about
thousands per boat.
$250 per linear foot.
Oh, okay.
Virginia, are there measures in place in these contracts that ensure nothing else is released into the lagoon?
Oh, yes, yes, they do all of that first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can I clarify something? The money for the derelict boat removal, the $115,000, it did not come out of the $1 million that's specified for the lagoon. It came out of the beach committee, the beach funding, but it was not part of the $1 million for the lagoon funding.
Was that by choice?
The beach committee recommended, the TDC beach committee recommended that the expenditure, that we cover it, but it was not part of the million, because it wasn't part of the grant process.
Yeah.
So we felt like it would be better to not have it be part of the $1 million because it did not come out of the community grant process.
Thank you for that, Claire. I had not heard that, so thank you.
Now you know.
Yeah, yes, yes. All right, mid-year budget adjustments. We had a lot of those to make. Those are done and were approved by the commission at their last meeting. Jumping down to work underway, Titusville,
Excuse me
yes.
just a minute. Could you touch on the oyster and plant site studies? What came out of that?
The oyster survival is quite high, 80+% of the garden oysters, and recruitment of new spat is really impressive. When we have a few more sites, as we gather more data, we can put together something to share with you, but it's all very encouraging.
That 80% survival rate covers oysters throughout the county, or is that regional?
This is on the specific sites that have been funded construction of oyster bars with Lagoon.
And that's on that map that we have? So that goes from Titusville to Palm Bay and
There
all
are,
places in between?
I think it's 4 oyster sites that are being monitored
Monitored?
right now, plus the 2 shoreline planting sites. And we have another site that's going to construction in May that will be covered under that existing task order with UCF. And we have 5 more sites that are in permitting right now, and we have a new task order with UCF drafted, but we're not going to pull the trigger on that until those sites are actually permitted and ready to go.
I know we have some mixed results with survivability in some of the volunteer gardens, backwater canals and things like that, so it's really exciting to me to hear 80% survival at our test sites, and we have natural recruitment.
And right, so the idea is to use that garden data to help with our site selection so that we're picking the best sites for constructing these reefs where we expect to be successful.
Excellent. Terry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'd be interested as we gather
We
the
can-
data. I can't cite the source, but anecdotally, it was being rumored that survival rates were good, but recruitment rates were low. So if we've got data that indicates recruitment is better than expected or at least up to par, that would be good to know.
So when we started, recruitment was approximately nil. And as we continue to introduce more and more oysters that are close to reproductive age, we are beginning to see recruitment. So, and we are staging our projects starting in the southern portion of the county where there are some extant populations of oysters, so there is some natural recruitment as well as recruitment, reproduction of the oysters that we placed. We don't have that in the northern Indian River Lagoon yet, but, you know, we're 10 years, so we're hoping to get there.
Good, thank you.
So last month, you saw a video on the installation of one of Titusville's baffle boxes. They are working on the installation of 5 baffle boxes this quarter, and I believe they're on their 3rd one right now. Jumping down to Sykes Creek, Zones M and T, Utilities has been exploring the use of an alternative construction technique called directional drill. This is especially important where we have coquina ridges right underneath the homes, and so in order to put in these pipes, it would be very expensive to dig through a lot of coquina. This directional drill can drill through the coquina, so we're looking at what is the reduced time and cost associated with that technology. Melbourne Riverside Septic to Sewer, they had completed the installation of the main line a few months ago, and they've got their first home connected, so that's progressing. Leaping down to Merritt Island muck dredging, we did an analysis. You know, we have the little Kiwanis Island for spoil, temporary spoil management. We have an agreement with Florida Inland Navigation District to use their site that's, 7 miles north of the area that we're trying to dredge. That site is still under design and then will have to be constructed. We've located a site that is right next to our project area that we've done the economics on it. It is cheaper to buy that site and develop it than to pump the material all the way up to the fine site. So we're working on acquisition of that site. We have a grant request that the County Commission will hopefully approve on Tuesday for Florida Inland Navigation District to fund nearly half of that purchase price, $500,000. So I wanted you to be aware of that. We've already talked about the Gitlin Oyster Bar that's going in May. We've talked about lateral line repairs. I wanted to do a video on the lateral line repairs and the monitoring the groundwater associated with that. Obviously, we have to have people willing in order to do that, but I'm hoping that we can use that video as an educational and outreach tool to try to reduce the scare factor and encourage people to participate. And then we are very busy preparing our budget request for 2019-2020 now that we have a plan adopted for that year, and last week was a deadline for some of our budget prep. Next week is the deadline for the rest of our budget prep, and everything, all of our budget forms are having to be converted to ADA compliant forms this year, and so it's just a much heavier lift than usual. So a lot of effort in that. On the flip side, presentations this month, Walker did a presentation with the South Patrick Residents Association about the Grand Canal dredging project, and Anthony and Brandon worked a booth at the Vieira Wetlands Festival, talked to lots of people there. And you've got a list of other things that we've been doing, trying to keep the community informed. In terms of future topics, last meeting, you asked that we reach out to the scientists who have been speaking directly to commissioners and invite them to present at one of your meetings. So I emailed all the commissioners and said, could you please give me the contact information for who these scientists are so that I can invite them, or you can invite them. I got one response and sent an invitation to one scientist and got no response from him. So I emailed a second time and copied the commissioner and still have no response. So I was hoping to bring that panel discussion to you in May, but so far looks like we need a different topic of discussion in May. So unless I get responses, that will not be happening. We do have lots of other exciting topics, though. As I mentioned, the outreach and engagement opportunities, and Danielle had requested that we look at a presentation on scoping and smoke testing. We're trying to arrange that for after your June break. We always have more project monitoring results that we can share. And mosquito control, I talked to the mosquito control director. He's also available in either May or August, depending on whether our panel discussion with scientists happens or not. So let me know if you have any other ideas, but those are the things that we're working on in the next few months. Are there any questions about that before I move to the rest? The green performance tables, this is what we chose for the, there was a request at the end of last month's meeting for some background on some of the materials that we provide, and so Brandon has got a PowerPoint to walk you through this table today. So I don't have anything to say about it now unless anybody has a question now.
I did. I just was looking at this and I'm just trying to get fresh eyes on it. We have the project complete as the third column. So, but some people are requesting reimbursements sent as the fourth and fifth columns. I didn't know if, just as a suggestion, maybe move project completed to the end. That way there's not an open space. But that was just probably a personal preference more than
I had
anything.
the same question.
Was there any logic in putting it in the third column?
For simple projects, it's complete, and then they send us a reimbursement request, and then we pay them. For bigger projects, which most of these probably are, there are pay requests along, and then the project is complete, and then there'll be one more draw at the end. So
I mean, either,
you can see the logic either way.
I'm good either way.
But I think, in terms of people who just want to see
Thank you,
what's
Vinny.
complete and don't care about all the nitty-gritty along the way, it probably is easier to have that in the far right. So that's an easy change, unless Brandon tells me no. I think that's an easy change.
Can I ask a question real quick? So project complete means the physical work is done. Reimbursement request with reimbursement sent means we've paid for it.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, typically, they just put a percent complete. It's easier to read, because, most projects don't just go from 0 to 100. And I would actually just put a percent there. If the project's 70% complete, 50, just like a construction project. It's easier to read, because then you know if you're tracking up or tracking back, how's it tracking.
I think the percentage is hard to calculate.
Remember, these are not the staff that are managing all this. This is not their project in general.
Okay.
So at least half of the projects are city projects, and they report to us quarterly.
Okay,
And so, if we do that, we will always be way behind.
I get that, I understand.
I would guess there's some correlation between the reimbursement percentage and the project completion, so we can probably gauge where the project is based on that as well, without having to do a lot of extra work.
Yes, I want to go back to a comment that I made several years ago. Because it was suggested that I was wrong. I don't think these reports are necessary every month. And from my perspective, quarterly or even semi-annually are fine for progress on these projects. It requires a lot of work of people to do these things. I know that some of you glean over these very carefully. I look at them and I don't see that much of a change from month to month, and I'm not sure it's valuable to do. And so if it's not valuable to do, why are we printing all this paper, and why are we spending time on this? What we're really interested in is whether the projects are getting done or not. And I think we can glean that in a quarterly fashion or a semi-annual fashion rather than doing this every month. Okay? So that was my comment 2 years ago. Everybody disagreed, and we went to this format that I think that's gotten a little clunky to deal with on a monthly basis. And, I'll just leave it there. If we get around to that discussion, I'd like to reduce the frequency of reporting to us.
I see that. I understand that.
Stephanie, go ahead.
It's
Oh,
also,
I'm sorry. Lorraine, hold on. Go ahead.
with that in mind, when you think about it, as we go through these projects, we're hearing verbally where these projects are. So we're getting an update monthly on the status of these projects. So there's no reason to duplicate those efforts. Thanks.
I was just,
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I mean, does that apply to these financial reports as well? Would it be more efficient to have those quarterly?
Maybe I'm the only one that, not necessarily, I guess I don't study these, but if we did them less than monthly, I'd like to do quarterly. I use these to send them out to people, because you're right, we do get updates every month, but there are only 6 people that are watching us at home. And for everybody else in the county that isn't, when they go, what are you guys doing? What are you doing? And I say, here, this is last month. If we go to a semi-annual, I think that distance is too much. Obviously, we should weigh the amount of staff time versus the benefit. That's always a pro and con. But I think as long as it's not taking too much time to have them every month.
It takes an enormous amount of time.
Okay,
There's a
so
lot of
maybe,
projects
Quarterly.
Virginia, is if we were to adopt a quarterly or semi-annual project report, would that what changes on your end? Because my first thought is you guys are probably going to keep this functioning, so you have it's a living, breathing document to you. This is going to be updated for you guys constantly. So how much does it ease your workload for because you in essence you would just be printing it and giving it to us quarterly instead of monthly? So how does that, what would change for you?
So right now, there's an email that goes out reminding everybody, update that sheet. It's got to be sent out by Friday.
Okay.
So, some staff are updating it as information comes in, and some staff are getting in there before the deadline so that you have the latest.
So it's not a central body managing this. Everybody in your department has access to it. They can go in
Yes.
and edit it okay. So, maybe for next month, you come back to us with a suggestion from your team.
Okay.
Do you have to
That
wait
would-
until next month?
I'm sorry?
Do you need to wait until next
Well,
month?
I would like to get feedback from our team as to what that means to go from monthly to quarterly. Todd, go ahead.
I think we just heard that it was significant. I guess I look at it even differently, even if it is not a huge burden, but we have a relatively limited number of staff, and there's tons of things they can be doing. And the granularity of monthly versus quarterly, I don't see us taking significant action on that.
Yeah.
And we have, this sheet is the one I pay attention to that says everything that's going on, and I think for Vinnie's purposes, to be able to send this out, that shows tons of activities. The movement here is just not that much, and so I would wholeheartedly support continuing to maintain our pertinent information, this update on a monthly basis, but some of the financials going to more quarterly, because I'll be candid, I don't do anything with them other than visit them periodically, and I haven't seen us as a body make any significant changes, and that's kind of my measure, is whether it's a little bit of time or a lot of time. If it's not prompting us to do something, it's a waste of time that can be done, that can be allocated somewhere else, and we got a limited number of staff and lots of work.
Well,
And I'd rather-
Brandon jumped at the opportunity to sit here, which I don't know that I've ever seen that before.
Can I just make
Go
a
ahead,
comment? That is, I'm concerned that the message we're saying with that is nobody's statusing these reports except quarterly or every 6 months or so. We're moving a fair amount of money through this program, and I think there's an expectation that people are watching what's going on. So generating the form itself, to me, is less critical than is there actually somebody who's watching these things, and looking at them every quarter, to me, is not sufficient. So that's my concern, that if we back off on the reporting, then that means we've backed off on the monitoring, and that, I think, is not a good thing.
Yeah, but the problem is, if there's no percent complete on here, you don't know if it's going up or down. And that's the biggest issue that I see. I look at it as on the construction side, because I'm in the, I work in that industry, and without a percent complete, I can't see if we're going up or down or backwards, sideways, wherever.
So
being green, red, yellow doesn't mean anything.
The measure, by and large, is they don't get paid until it gets complete, so the thing we're looking for is, did they get it complete? We're, as John said, and we all agree, these guys are not the project managers for the actual activity. So getting down to, weighted milestones and where we are in the accomplishment is not what I'm asking for. But I think there needs to be some indication that, in fact, projects are being reviewed, being looked at. So that's my 2 cents.
Go ahead and hear from Brandon.
So just, as Virginia mentioned, that we only get the updates from the cities and other entities quarterly. So we don't know what their percentage is complete until those quarterly reports come in. As far as staff time on it, I know I spend probably half a day just making that ADA compliant and getting it all, set up, because unfortunately the version you guys get is different than what we have to enter in. So I have one sheet that the staff enters in, I transfer that over to another sheet to do the calculations, because the calculations aren't ADA compliant. That then has to go to the final ADA compliant sheet. So there's multiple steps in creating that sheet. So it is a lot of time each month to try to get that all together. But most of the things that you see on there are also reported in the text in the progress report. So any progress we made on a project, we try to give that highlight.
So, in summary, you would support and defend a move to a quarterly report?
I could get more accomplished if, we are doing it quarterly.
I know Stephanie and Mel had a
Go ahead, Vinny.
comment.
Oh, Stephanie?
Mel had her hands.
I think that goes right back to exactly what we were saying. It is being reported on. It's not like nobody's looking at this. All of these projects are being reported on. That's what that sheet is that we have. It tells us everything that's going on. It's duplicating those efforts by doing that other form. And so it's not that, Terry, that no one's looking at it. They absolutely are looking at it, and they're reporting on it to us. And if anyone wants to send it out, it's there in that other format. So it's a duplication of effort, and I think we should, in fact, if you're open for a motion, I'll move that we go to a quarterly.
Let's hope we still have a discussion here with Mel, but I think we're going in that direction.
Well, we can, you can still have.
Second and then discuss.
Yeah.
I have
If-
something that might help shape a motion.
Sure.
I'm hoping, is this available publicly on the dashboard right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so, never mind. I was going to say that that's the most important thing in my book when we're talking about the public interest, is they want to know how are we using our money, and what is the status on Project X. So as long as that's available, we have the ability to point them in the right direction. And outside of that, I'm not sure what the value of these reports are to us. I
All
mean,
right, so before we entertain a motion, I have one more question to the agency.
Yeah.
In our progress report, wherever it is here, and the work underway this month and the work completed, this doesn't cover, these are highlights.
Right.
It doesn't cover every project.
correct.
So, is that something we want to move towards, putting a bullet point in for every project? So there's something for us to read on every project in exchange from the progress report.
I think it's available to us if we want to do our homework before meetings. We can look it up if there are projects that are in mind, or if there is something that we're being asked about specifically. But I think that if there's no change,
Why report on it?
why would we care?
Okay.
So I would, just to help.
just say that the operative statement, when Brandon said we only get the status reports from the project, the actual project managers quarterly, okay, I'm good with quarterly.
Right,
you know,
that makes
updating
sense.
this
The cities.
from the cities.
Yeah, the county
Because you're just
projects we
getting a
know
repeat.
live, you know, as they happen, but the cities are only required to buy their
Consistency, I
contract.
could abide quarterly.
Well, my only concern is we've got projects coming down the pike, and there won't be anything for us to see or read about until the project gets going and it's something worth putting a bullet point on. And that's just my concern. And, you know, maybe you guys don't share it.
No, I agree.
I'm just one guy.
Yeah, I sort of smiled when you said we could do our homework and look it up. One of the problems that I think we have is there's this, I mean, I call even this is a summary level, right? If I want to drill back to what exactly is Brevard County denitrification retrofit, blah, 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 Flounder Creek, can I get back to where was the application, what's the detailed how much money is, you know, allocated for that and so on? That's the disconnect that I've been uncomfortable with for some time now, and it's the balance between turning staff into accountants and, you know, reporting mice, and having a you know, the database we can go to. And I keep saying, I think there ought to be a master database, right? There ought to be something that's got all this stuff. There may not be. I've run into this before, but that would be, you know, the holy grail.
Danielle?
I motion to make these reports a quarterly report.
Second.
Further discussion?
Yeah, I just like some clarification then. Are we talking the performance table only, or are we talking about the financial statement as well?
Because we're talking about the project performance table.
Okay, because there's a lot of data in this that there's obviously a correlation between the two. I mean, this is where you have the information about per project, how much money is being spent and allocated, and how much is left. So is the burden to prepare this similar and
Yeah, perhaps worse.
perhaps worse? Yeah.
And also, right now, IT does half of the work on making things ADA compliant. By August at the, you know, latest, if not sooner, the burden's going to be on us entirely. So they have training classes for us that we're going over in the next few months. So we'll have to do all the heavy lifting on the ADA compliance, so that's going to add even more time.
So what it actually entails, ADA compliance?
There's a lot of tagging things so that the correct reading order is done. So you have to, in some of those, especially with charts and things, you have to manually go in and tell the screen readers what order to read things in and make sure that all your tags
Each cell.
Yeah.
Each cell in the table.
So we have a motion that's been seconded to move the project performance table to quarterly.
Before that motion was made, this is in discussion, right? You suggested we ask staff to go back and think about
I
this
did.
and come back. I think I would be more comfortable with letting them come back to us next month with, unless they're ready to say it right now, and I don't want to put them on the spot.
Yeah.
Can
But I would rather them have a chance to think about this and get back to us. I don't like running into things without blindsiding
And what I was
people.
going to say, well, but I think one of the things that they can do, and I was going to volunteer to help too, to see if I can help find a way to automate some of that stuff, Brandon. I know that a lot of the ADA stuff you mentioned the word and people are like, oh gosh, it's so hard and there can be so much involved, but there really are ways to do it easier and automated, so if I would offer to take a look and see if we can make that easier, which may change the whole paradigm of the time involved. But then also, if Virginia, if you and the staff got back to us as far as which tables and which reports are taking the time, and if we went to a quarterly on the performance table, but we didn't go to quarterly on the table Charles just talked about, would that even make a difference? Because if you're taking the time to do the one sheet, wouldn't it just be as easy to do them all? So maybe to Dr. Windsor's request or recommendation, as David's suggestion. I'm giving it to Dr. Windsor this time, all right, David? It's all right. But that staff go back and come back to us next month and tell us what they would recommend as far as clearing up a bunch of staff time. That would only be my suggestion.
I like that idea. I think next month, we can move on it very quickly in just 1 minute. We can make a decision. And with Vinny offering to volunteer to help throw his intellect behind automating some of those systems, I think that's a great idea, and I think we should take advantage of that opportunity. Todd?
And I'm fine with that. I would just ask that in doing that is that as we come back for the discussion, we make sure we're clear about what we are getting out of this, because candidly, we've spent almost no time on any of these documents on a routine basis. I would rather us continue to spend no time on an ongoing basis, and then once a quarter, when it does get produced, spend some extra. But I also heard additional comments from Terry about better connectivity up to some of the project details. That's more of a one-time investment that my suspicion is easier to manage, and I'd personally rather see that time investment to see that connectivity, so that those folks that want to dive into the details that are able to see that linkage all the way to what exactly is happening on a project that is very important to them, that it's near their neighborhood, that it's their passion, whatever it is, that they've got a better ability to do that. I think that's easier because it's a single event type of activity that they can do. So I would just ask that in doing that evaluation, staff really take a look at what it is that we're covering as a board and what value we're looking to get out of these, so that that's part of our discussion. And then the last comment is, remember, we're an advisory panel. We're not the ones executing on this work. And I look at how I interact with my board on the work that I do. I would challenge you to look at any city around here. I would challenge you to look at the county government and ask what level of detail that they're going into on budget tracking at a board level on a monthly basis. And I think you'll find
Danielle, go
that
ahead.
it's not significant.
I understand that we have incomplete data except every quarter. And so I don't see why we even consider a monthly when it's half of the data. I think that it's important to go to quarterly, lessen the load on them, everything is accessible, as Mel mentioned, and simplify the process to quarterly, hence my motion that's on the table.
I agree
There
with
is
that.
a motion.
Motion on the
There is a motion and it's second.
There is.
Staff?
Vinny?
Call the question.
Vinny, what, with respect to Danielle's position on that these reports are incomplete, do you have any thoughts on?
I mean, Brandon said the county reports are done more than quarterly, so there is additional, maybe not be a lot of information.
So, yeah, I ask our county staff to update me on the status of their projects each month. But by contract, the cities are only required to report quarterly. Now, I'll hear sometimes from cities if progress is going on in certain things in between those quarters, but it's not consistent with all the cities and all the projects.
All right, so we have a motion that's been seconded. I think we're prepared for a vote. Danielle, go ahead, one more time.
It's going to call to question.
Go ahead.
That means we vote.
Yeah, well, I'm getting ready to.
You actually have to vote on the question. It's not automatic.
Okay, so that's,
She was gonna, she said.
So
He was going
continue.
down the road.
Yeah, so
Yes.
I'm prepared to vote for it right now.
okay.
I just wanted everybody to know this is what I'm getting ready to do. All in favor of the motion that's been seconded to change the monthly progress reports to quarterly? In favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Motion carries. So we're moving to quarterly monthly progress reports.
Performance table.
I'm glad, yeah, performance table.
Do we also need to visit, I'm asking Brandon and Virginia, do we also need to visit the financial statements?
Financial report?
And
Financial
that,
reports as well.
that is Crystal, not Brandon. So Crystal, if you want to come over here. I think that the revenue graph is fairly easy to update monthly, and so I would recommend that we continue to do that. The financial details are are grueling. There is a master database for all the financials. Unfortunately, it is a government accounting system called SAP that, you know, would spit out a bajillion green sheets that would be completely incomprehensible. You know, you pull a report on each individual project. There's no nice, neat ADA compliant table that spits out of that database. So Crystal is creating these every month.
So when we're talking about information that would be available to us as Oversight Committee, is that required to be ADA compliant?
If it's in your packet, that packet is a public document posted on our website. It has to be ADA compliant.
If you requested it though, Terry, the response to you would not need to be ADA. And I think the way this could be done is it wouldn't be done in a packet, it would be done as a web interface. And then so the website would need to be ADA compliant, which is a lot easier than working with PDFs, but that's just my past experience.
Well, I'm pretty sure the SAP database is not ADA compliant.
Correct.
So having macros that would allow us to query it along the lines that we think would be beneficial to the Oversight Committee, in my mind, should not require ADA compliance. That's just my layman's opinion.
The challenge is once it comes into a public forum and has to be posted and is posted and made available, then that requirement applies. If you as an individual go in and have a conversation with staff one-on-one, it's not. But the minute that there's that document created that becomes part of our agenda, it is.
But you could email again, you could email back and forth, and that format would only need to be a format that's accessible to you.
Emails must be ADA compliant for our documents.
For public records.
For public record.
Yeah, but if you send a request to him based on his ability to interpret the data, and if somebody requested that, they would just be requesting the communication you sent. I don't think that communication would then need to be in ADA compliance. If I emailed a picture to somebody.
The county has a settlement agreement on this issue.
Yes.
And we have deadlines for different phases of things. So right now, everything on our website has to be ADA compliant. Everything in these agenda packets has to be ADA compliant. We're moving towards every public record has to be ADA compliant. So while emails might work for us for a few more months, they will be a problem during the 10-year life of this program. So
I don't know that, I just don't, so, and I've been involved with these issues. I don't know then how every person that sends an image to anybody in an email is then going to put an alt tag on that image or do a long description. If you want to ask about adding hours to every county staff member who's going to be sending a picture, so my opinion is a personal communication is from one to the other. If he needed a reasonable accommodation, you could give it to him. But if somebody requested that communication, then they would get that communication, not that communication in alternative formats. But that's just my interpretation. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'll stop pretending to be one, Christine.
Well,
I'm sorry.
we're talking about two different things. So, you know, as far as we're creating documents that are going to be posted on the website and available,
Like
that it has to be
ADA compliant.
Right.
But I was saying if Terry emailed Virginia and asked for something, she could then email that back in a non-ADA compliant format, correct?
Right, but yes, but the discussion right now is what to distribute in a package.
Well, I think Terry was asking about.
So it's not,
So why are we
I'm
discussing
after
what's
something that
ADA
allows
compliant?
us to do
Because
the
the law
drill down.
tells you what's ADA compliant.
Excuse me?
If the law tells you what needs to be ADA compliant, why are we discussing what needs to be ADA compliant?
Thank you. I'm trying
I mean,
to
it's just-
clarify what needs to be ADA
Well,
compliant. If I
you're
get,
Hold on, John.
Okay.
if I get a spreadsheet, if I ask a question and the answer to that question can be communicated in an Excel spreadsheet, not with all these labels and tags, does that communication have to be ADA compliant?
No.
Thank you.
So it's a settled matter then. We were on the discussion previous to that about whether we were going to be moving the financial tables to a quarterly status as well. I want to get back to that. That's why you sat down, right? I apologize. What's your name again?
Crystal.
Crystal. Crystal, do you want to comment briefly on
It-
that report?
It takes, although I am in Excel and I'm constantly updating it, it is a live document, and I cannot technically change the form unless it has been changed in SAP. So when you see things on the document and you're like, this is old, there's a process, because I use SAP to extract the data into Excel. From Excel, I have to turn it into a format of Word, and then from Word, I have to turn it into PDF, and then in PDF, I have to do what I have been trained to do to make it ADA compliant, and then have it double-checked from our IT standpoint to
And that's
create this document.
This representation.
Yes.
So what would a move from monthly to quarterly mean to you?
It would mean that I would only have to do this quarterly, but I would still keep up with it every...
She would keep up with it in Excel, but
Yes,
she would not
but I wouldn't have to
through
go
all this
through the-
production.
How much, well, give me an idea, how much time are you talking about?
If the form does not corrupt, which many times it does, or anytime you add a line, a project, a change that is not just a numerical change, I have to create a whole new form. The Excel form is fine, it's the form that I have to create from that Excel form. So it can take me 1 to 3 days to get this completed.
Each
because-
month?
Each month.
Half a week. Does anybody have any questions for Crystal?
Question, I'm prepared to make a motion that we also move the financial statement to quarterly.
And second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of moving the financial report to quarterly along with the project tables?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries.
And so this doesn't affect the motion, it's a request for staff that, now that we're going to quarterly, I'm very focused on that we get value out of everything that's produced. So I would ask that when we do produce this now quarterly, that we spend more time as a board actually going through this in detail. So now we've reduced the frequency, but let's make value as a committee to really walk through this very purposefully now. So to me, that is, we're backing off on the timing, but we're going to make sure that we really understand what you've prepared and take the time to have the appropriate discussion for both us as well as the public. And I personally, I think that's a very good trade-off, that we're being diligent in reducing our costs as a government. We're not spending any more dollars than we have to associated with something that's not getting used, but we're able to get improved value out of it as well.
So based on the discussion and motion today, when will the next report be available? Would that be August, July, 3 months from now? Or is there more of a synchronous?
So let's time it where we have just gotten all the city updates and have had time to get that into the form.
So the city quarterly reports are due at the end of this month, so then it would be the following month after that when we'd be delivering it to you.
So May, starting May, every quarter after.
So if they're due the end of the month and our meeting is mid-month, in that 2 weeks, you guys have adequate time to produce all of it and have it ready and on this agenda.
Good point, Todd.
Doesn't sound, I think it's probably more likely to be June.
Yeah, carry it to the next month.
We're not meeting in June.
We don't meet in June.
Except we're not meeting in June.
Yeah, but still.
I mean, they normally do it every month, so would you be able to do May?
Yeah.
Have you been able to
Yeah, I
get them
think-
done?
Yeah.
So, all right, we'll aim for May. And if that doesn't happen for some reason, we will email it to you in June.
And we were supposed to have a presentation, which it doesn't seem like we have much participation in. So maybe we take that time and spend a considerable amount of time on this with a quarterly and make that our first.
Deep dive.
Yeah.
Now, can you put a percent complete in there? Instead of just green, yellow, red?
We can, because we'll have that from the city. And that's one of the reasons we left percent complete off of
I understand.
that, is because we don't have it every month
I can
updated from
understand it.
all of them.
Yeah.
All right, I think this is exciting news. I didn't come today to present any motions, and we streamlined the agency's bureaucracy quite a bit, so they're probably going to celebrate with a cocktail later.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, so what's remaining is, in our monthly report, is the narrative, and there was an open question about completeness.
What would be added to it? Yeah,
and these two charts. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Virginia, was there any further discussion on the revenue or financial statements? Are we all set? We're all done with that?
We're set.
Okay, so we're going to move
Thank you
on
very
to, I'm sorry? Any discussion on that? Nope. We're going to move on to our, the fun part of today's meeting. It's the part I always look forward to, and that I said I would pay to participate. We're going to start off with a presentation by Dr. Listopd on the breeze-swept septic to sewer update.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here, so thank you for inviting me. See if I can find my presentation. So, I think I became aware that I only have 15 minutes, so I was going to present breeze-swept results. That was the focus of the presentation. I was going to give you a little bit of a preview into a couple other studies that are currently undergoing, groundwater sampling studies, but we'll see if we have time for that. The breeze-swept, I was here, I'm trying to remind myself that it was maybe a year ago with some preliminary results on breeze-swept. And so this is just a review for those of you that were not here during my previous presentation of what the breeze-swept project is. It's the first septic to sewer conversion project in the city of Rockledge. And it was considered a high priority by the city for several reasons. One of them is, of course, very, very close, as you can see here. Let's see if I can not working. You're fine. Yeah, it's very close to the lagoon. Right. And you can see the color coded here of the different parcels is the age of the parcels. There were quite a few of these houses had been built in the 50s and 60s, so those septic tanks had been there for a long time. Most of these houses had 2 or 3 septic tanks in each parcel, and also the soils have very high hydroconductance. So basically the groundwater, anything that was seeping through would move very quickly into the lagoon. So this was the first study that was designed in terms of sampling to measure the performance of a retrofit. What would happen to the groundwater once we connected? So we used a before and after control impact study. What that simply means is that we're measuring data before it got connected, after it got connected, within the subdivision, and we also wanted to make sure we were controlling for it by having 2 wells positioned in an area that was always on septic and never got retrofitted, just in case something happened to, some other variable happened to drive the changes that we were seeing. So here you can see the design of it. So we had 3 wells installed. This is in blue is the breeze-swept subdivision, and you have 2 wells down here. It's hard to see these in green, and this is another community that is on septic and was never retrofitted, so it's still on septic. So this is the status of the project. Basically, we had 6 events that were pre-connection to sewer events, and we calibrated. We used that to figure out how much loads were coming into the lagoon for credit for the city, and then we had 12 other events once the whole subdivision was connected. And we are currently in the process of having revisions done on the final report, so that the project is pretty much complete. So this is what we collected as part of the parameters. We have field parameters, all is associated with groundwater sampling, but the focus was on nitrogen and fecal coliform were the focus. If we knew back then what we know now, we would have added phosphorus to it, and hopefully I can show you a preview for that. But for this particular project, we focused on nitrogen. So This graph shows you, in a nutshell, the results, in a summary form in one graph. So I'll spend a little bit of time on it because it has a lot of things in it. So first of all, I have the 6 events before it was connected are here, before the red line, and the 12 events are beyond this red line, the after line. The green line corresponds to the pre-swept wells, the data for the pre-swept wells. The gray line, the data for the control wells. So what we're looking for here is, did things change before and after the connection, and was a change different in the pre-swept wells versus the control wells? So if you look at here, in the first 6 events, we typically had, particularly once it started getting wetter, we had the pre-swept wells with higher concentrations. This is for total nitrogen, than the control wells. And once everything was connected, the community was connected to sewer, there was a shift. And now you see the gray line has higher concentrations, the gray line is your controls, than the pre-swept. So what this shows you is there was a change that indeed appears to be connected to connecting the subdivision. So now we have the control wells are still loading the same or more as they were before, but the pre-swept have dramatically, they have reduced their concentrations. Now you do see that there's variability, it goes up and down, and that's expected with seasonality. So in fact, you can see this big peak, that's probably what's catching your eye in here. And right here, and then when we looked at the peak, I wanted to show you, this is the same data, the only difference here is I added rainfall. You can see it's derived from very high rainfall events, particularly when the first time it rained very hard during that season. So there was an early summer where we had all this rainfall coming in, and we had, you can see 6+ inches in one day. And then we sampled a few days after. So we can definitely see the concentrations go up after it rains, and this is why, yes?
Yeah, because a lot of this has to do with residual stuff in the soils, right? So eventually, being connected to sewer should eventually just drop off to almost to nothing.
Well, we still expect some nitrogen in it. Right. I'm not sure how much else will drop off. We finished sampling. At this point, we won't know. The change was very quick. We actually expected, the first idea when we were doing the sampling, the 12 sampling events, we were going to space them out and do every other month so we could look at how it changes for 2 years past it. But once we started going out there, and we waited 3 months before the whole subdivision was connected to go back out to make sure that we were seeing the change, and we noticed pretty big reductions in concentrations. We were like, oh, we better make sure we keep sampling this monthly, not to miss the drop. So that's what we did. We actually sped up that post. So we were expecting it to take longer than it did to see any difference. In this case, it was pretty quick, and part of it was it has a lot of coquina, so it probably has less organic to really have that. Yes?
I'm curious why December has a lot of rainfall and everything like that.
So the rainfall, if you look at the event, it's hard to time it. It was right the first day it rained, so we didn't really collect data for 30 days after that peak of rainfall. So timing. And
antecedent conditions.
Yeah, and the water table was very low at that time after several months of, it's pretty low. So that's something we have definitely seen is as the water table rises, then we start seeing higher loads typically coming in. And sometimes that's not just one event, 1 inch of rainfall makes a big difference. It's a cumulative and then a big peak of rainfall. Then we see that.
Are you able to draw any conclusions from that then?
I have some.
Okay.
More. Some are coming. So all I want to, this was total nitrogen, and when we looked at the pattern of other constituents of nitrogen, different types of nitrogen, it's obvious that it's mostly different by nitrite, which is NOx here, so I just wanted to show you. Looks like the same exact graph. So most of the loads in this area, most of the pollutant is in the form of nitrite. Ammonia, we actually didn't have that much ammonia to start off, and this was mostly because the water table was well below, so it's in 7-8 feet, so most of the ammonia releasing from the septic drain fields gets converted to nitrate, and so we measure most of it in nitrate. But what you can see is once we connected, this is the line, this flat line that you can see here on the bottom, that's the laboratory minimal detection limit, so it actually wasn't detected ammonia at all once we connect it. So that's why I want to show you. So, this is another form, and what I wanted to show you here is a different way we actually use statistics to see, is it different, the data before and after? Can we see a difference? And so we typically looked at this box plot. So what the box plot is, because I'm going to show you some of those for the other studies, is the distribution of the data, so the range of the concentrations we measure through time. So here we have the concentrations, the range of the concentrations for the pre-connection, the control versus the post-connection. What you're looking for is this line in the middle is the median, is kind of the measure. You can think of it in terms of an average. Did it change? And did this distribution of the data, the range, which the box represents between 25 and 75% of the whole data set, did it change a lot? And for the control, you can see the line's about the same in the middle. The boxes are similar. In the retrofit, you can see there was definitely a decrease. So this is for total Q-dial. And the reason I wanted to bring TKN in here is that we actually have another form, probably urea, that also decreased. And this wasn't measured directly. We measured it using TKN. So fecal, we had off and on fecal hits before it was connected in the breeze-swept community, and afterwards it was mostly non-detects, except we had one big peak one day in August for this community. Now, fecal coliform could be for other forms. It could be a bird, it could have been dog, fecal coliform, so we don't know exactly. It was a one-time peak. It also coincided with the big rainfall event, same exact time. So something pushed. So what this table shows you is our statistics. So I didn't want to bore you with all the statistics we did, but we did test and see were the drops in reductions in the nitrogen types nitrogen concentrations we measured, were they statistic or not? Were they statistically significant or not? And what this table shows you in green means there was a decrease in concentrations. The orange means there's actually an increase in concentration. So if you look at these part of the table, this shows you retrofit wells. So this means the breeze-swept wells. And what you can see is before it was connected, NOx nitrate was 1.4, and it went to 0.425 after it was connected. So there's a significant drop in concentrations. The asterisk in here means it was statistically significant. So there was a reduction in nitrogen, in NOx, in TKN, in total nitrogen, and even in fecal coliform after it got connected in the breeze-swept wells. Looking at the control wells, what's important to notice is that we have the exact opposite trend. Actually, all these numbers went up, and there were some of them, the only one that was statistically significant going up was ammonia. So in general, what you can think of it, the control wells stayed about the same. We're seeing higher concentrations, but there's a lot of variability. But the breeze-swept wells, we see a difference. They went down. So what is different about them in this case was the fact they got connected, and the control community is still on septic. So that was pretty much my conclusions. The other thing that I want to mention is that the concentrations do vary a lot through time, and you do have to watch the water table. So our higher nutrient concentrations for all the wells and even the fecal coliform hits were connected to very high rainfall events. So just going out there and taking one sample can really skew your conclusions. It's very important to look at the data through time using seasonality. So that's what I wanted to present about breeze-swept. I'm not sure if you're interested to look at some of the other preview questions.
Do you have we had a prediction of what the nitrogen reduction would be from this conversion. Do we have that updated forecast based on the conclusion of this project?
I have not reviewed that yet, so I didn't bring that. So far, we used the data to calibrate, the pre-data to calibrate the model, and it was right in the ballpark. I think it was 100 pounds higher than was predicted before we had any data. But it's using 3 wells to predict, what would this load without knowing really the volume. We can do that prediction. It's in the final report, but I'm reviewing it. But if that's a number, I can definitely send that number over. Yes. There.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I'm curious, on the septic to sewer connections, Are we pretty much just taking the pipe outside of the house from the septic connection and then hooking it up to a new sewer lateral line? Is that what we're doing?
In
I
this
ask that
case-
because I'm curious if there's potentially old cast iron plumbing underneath the house still sitting there,
They
potentially
abandoned on site
hitting.
the septics, if that's your question. Yeah, so they put
So there's
new-
old septic systems that could still be leaking on
They
site?
pumped them out
They pumped
and
them out, okay.
abandoned them on site, so.
So in other words, we could still, the only concern is potentially underneath the house, underneath the slab, have old pitted piping that's still leaking?
Possibly.
Potentially.
Right. And some of these houses, the septic was really underneath the whole house. I mean, some of these houses are 2 and 3. It's quite challenging to abandon some of the septic. So you couldn't really actually ever remove the septic tanks without.
Oh, so they have the septics underneath?
Yep. Yes.
Given the results, are we now going to try to retrofit that other neighborhood that was your control neighborhood?
That's a great question. The city isn't here to answer that question. That probably would be a question for them. I have a lot of the residents that every time we go sample, run out there, are we next? Are we next? How's the water looking? Can you see? And I'm like, I wish I had, X-ray vision could measure concentration by looking at the water. It would be a lot cheaper than sending it to the lab. But so seems like they are really interested. And I mentioned I've expressed that interest to the city, and I think they're looking at it. I'm not sure how far. I think they have another project maybe that they are prioritizing first, but I'm not 100%. That's a great question for them.
Go ahead.
What are the distances from the river?
I don't know if I know that by heart.
It's,
I think it varied.
it's not that far away.
No, some of them.
It's within
So they-
probably a couple
100.
hundred feet.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
The first
Because our
rows-
rule of thumb has been like, 50 yards from the lagoon.
Right, and I think it's 50 yards for the first or second parcels, closest, and then it does get further away.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, really, when you think about 50 meters, it's very, very small. It's one house.
Especially with the soil.
Yeah.
Typically, it's one house from the river, right, or a waterway. Yes.
How old are the houses on average?
So on average, they're in the 60s. There's some houses older in the 50s, some are in the 60s, some are newer, maybe 70s. But yes, it's a pretty old neighborhood.
And maybe I should know this, but I mean, we have supplemented, or we're paying for all the connections in the whole area, even when they're beyond the 50 yards.
Right. If a project area is approved, we're paying for that entire community, everything within the polygon to get connected.
Can I ask one more question? Have we ever considered an area that's already sewered where where there are folks that haven't hooked up because of the costs?
Yes. Yes, that's in the plan.
Okay.
So just the question again, back on your data, with some of the spikes that are occurring that are rainfall correlated, I mean, is that likely that it's really driven much more by then fertilizers and?
It could be. I mean, that we particularly see, where we're seeing those spikes is actually in this well up here. And it's interestingly enough, that's a well where we see some houses to the south of it that they're vacant lots. So I'm not sure exactly what is driving those spikes. I haven't seen much evidence in that particular neighborhood of a lot of fertilizer use. There's not a lot of manicuring. You know what? I have not seen anyone apply, and typically I do in some of the neighborhoods.
It just, from a practical standpoint, I mean, the septics appear, and I would expect to be kind of base loaded, relatively, constant discharge, with some maybe differences in how the groundwater's flowing due to rainfall, but at some level, you're seeing concentration. I would expect mass maybe to increase with rainfall as you're pushing more through, but with the concentration going up, there's got to be a source somewhere. And I guess that's another piece is we've got places like this that we've already got significant investment in monitoring infrastructure. If there's a way to capitalize on that on down the road too, I think that's a good place for staff to look if there's opportunities to continue to learn more that might affect some of our other decisions on where we invest.
I think the monitoring that's why I keep saying the monitoring one season. And one thing to keep in mind here is that by the time we started monitoring, doing the pre-connection monitoring, they were connecting the houses. So it would have been really nice to plan ahead and really have more pre-connection monitoring. We were rushing to get these done as they were connecting. So
I'd be really curious where there's the higher test well to see if there's leaking under the slab, to get those scoped and to know if that is contributing at all, since there's high fecal coliform as well.
yeah, it was one-time event. And we do see sometimes, even in natural settings, we do see spikes of fecal coliform. They're not unusual. This was a pretty high spike. It was, I think, too numerous to count, even diluted. So it could be a
the
dog.
nitrogen spiked equivalent to the fecal coliform spike at the same time. So I think that would be interesting to know if we're connecting all of these lateral lines and where it's spiking, there's still sewage leaking because it wasn't completely covered, if you will.
Or it hasn't passed all the way through the system already.
Or what?
Or it hasn't passed all the way through already, I assume. I assume there's a slow delay as it flows. Those subdivisions have a pretty big slope on them. They got a real big slope. And that goes to my question, is the one monitoring well appears to be up on the slope fairly high, while the other monitoring well is down at river level. Was there any differential between the two? I said monitoring wells, I meant the control monitoring wells.
Well, yes. Particularly because one of them that we placed it is very close to the river, and sometimes I think we are even seeing an influence of Lagoon going in just by looking at the conductivity. And they are different, and we're seeing more loads closer to the Lagoon than we are actually in this person's well. But it was quite, it was difficult to place the wells in this control community. We were trying to use right-of-ways, and with equipment, we often couldn't reach beyond the areas I really wanted to place the wells. If we had homeowners give us permission, that's a lot easier to place it out exactly where you want them, downstream from the drain field. Now we're constrained with, we need to be within the right-of-way, where's the plume moving, where's the best way to do it. We're trying to capture most of that community by putting it as close to the lagoon as possible. And I think we are seeing that, higher numbers. By looking at conductivity, I can see when the water table is higher that we might be seeing some influence of the lagoon, but most of the time we are capturing higher plumes, higher concentrations in that one. It's having this perfect design and going in the field and implementing it sometimes is challenging, particularly when you have constraints on access. And
Thank you very much, Dr. Listopd, for your presentation.
She finished? I know she just started. We were asking some questions. She had some future information on some other septic disorder in light of us adding some projects to the plan. I would just like to maybe quickly or briefly.
Okay, so I did bring two other preliminary studies that are underway. One is the MICO, septic to sewer conversion. And really the difference on this project, it's a mixed use, so it's the first project being in consideration to be converted, and it has both residential and commercial properties. So the reason why this is so important to monitor is we don't really know how to estimate loads coming off of a commercial system. So they're really not the same as residential, obviously. They could be a lot higher use or not. It depends on the property. So in this case, we knew well ahead of time that we really wanted to connect data before it was connected. And so we are right now in the before connection sampling. And we placed 4 wells, and our focus was really on commercial property. So we went and recruited commercial property owners to allow us to put wells and the properties, so not right away. So that's challenging, and there were some very willing participants, others less, but we ended up placing them distributed from north to south. So this is the MICO area. The whole area in red is in consideration for being retrofitted. And so we have one well up here, right on Miko, and this is like a liquor convenience store. We have one here that's right near downstream the drain field of a bar, so we expect maybe more use. We have one here that is in a plaza that has a restaurant, it has a dog grooming, it has a salon, so it has a lot of people coming and going all the time in the parking lot. And finally, the last one is in the marina that has a restaurant also in it. So this is where we are on this project. And this is preliminary results for total nitrogen. And so what this is, and I'm showing each individual well, the data for each individual well. So red is the one most north, yellow, so it's from north to south, the way I'm displaying the colors. The yellow one is the bar, the green one is the plaza that had all the restaurants, and the purple is the marina. And so what you can clearly see how different these are, total nitrogen. And also how they vary, you know, there's rainfall and they vary through time. The one that has been consistently highest is this well, which is the one that has the restaurant, and so it would have a lot higher use. Dog groomers. And so we are looking at reasons beyond maybe higher use. This is actually a very new system. And so I feel bad because there was a lot of investment done in this drain field. And it's actually a combination, it's 2 or 3 drain fields. Was a lot of money invested recently by the landlord to do this. So he still has a lot higher concentration. So we are looking at potential other causes of it. And there is actually a package plant upstream from it. So there might be maybe something that it's pretty far, but it might be something coming from the groundwater. So that might be something we want to investigate. Is there something else, an infiltration happening that we are capturing in that location that is not only from this drain field? Because some of those concentrations you can see are pretty high. We're talking about as high as 21 milligrams per liter of nitrogen that we're looking in the groundwater. They vary between 3 and 20 something, but really average is 7-8 milligrams per liter. So that's quite a lot of loadings.
And that green one is a new septic tank?
Pretty new drain field, maybe a couple of years old, and so there was the owner was very proud of the investment in the new drain field. So this is looking at the same type of the data, so you can see the data range is better. You can clearly see the green one stands out, and so far with the data we have, we do some tests, statistical testing, and it's significantly different and higher than all the other ones. The other ones are not different from each other. TP is interesting. So this is phosphorus. In this case, we learned maybe we should be looking at phosphorus because we are seeing some higher contributions in the septic communities from phosphorus than in the other types of communities. So let's sample phosphorus. What you can see here is that in this case, the well that has the highest concentrations is the first one, the one most to the north, that has a convenience store. So that's interesting. It's completely different than the other well. But in the last few sampling events, we have the 2 of them kind of be pretty high. So the data here is around 0.8 to as high as, I think, 1.5 milligrams per liter, which I want to point out is very high for phosphorus. So that just shows you, with the data we have, the 2 wells that are highest are those 2, and they're statistically higher than the other 2 wells. Okay, so that was preliminary on the Miko. We are still sampling. I think we are in sampling event number 10. And I'm not sure where the status is on the connections. That is a question, but so far we are going to keep sampling until that is connected. And the idea is to then look, can we see a difference post-connection? Now, the county-wide groundwater study. So this is a much larger study, and it's been funded jointly by the Save Our Lagoon plant and FDP, and Marine Resources Council is involved, is project manager on half of those wells, I guess 2/3 of the wells, and the other third is a swirl well, so we kind of supplemented them, and so we have a pretty large study. And what the goal of the study is really understand environmental social drivers of wastewater pollution in Brevard County and prioritize areas with groundwater contamination. And I think you might have seen some of those slides that compare reclaimed with, so they're coming from this study. And just to give you a very, there's a lot of tasks. This is a very large study with a lot of modeling involved. Where we are at is sampling. So we installed the wells in June. So we have been sampling since June 2018. And we are anticipated to keep sampling at least until November of this year. And we also have citizen science that will be trained, scientists trained, and we will supplement the sampling using this direct push points method that you probably have heard about to supplement and try to figure out in more detail some of these communities. So this is where we're sampling at. It goes all the way from the north to the south. We have an area in Titusville. We are doing Santa Riviera. Highlight here, so Titusville. This is a brief swab. I just kept it here so you could see where we're sampling all over the county. This is the Santa Riviera area. This is the Turkey Creek area, and we have Melbourne Beach and Satellite Beach, and then Merritt Island. So we are really a little bit everywhere in the Barrier Islands and mainland. And what we did is we set up in most of these areas several types of treatments. So we were looking at communities on septic, communities on sewer with reclaimed, and we also have two controls, what we call natural. So our natural areas are non-developed. So this is what we expect, background to be. So you're never going to have zero, so you expect some background to be there. So what this graph shows you is data since June up to February 2019 for total nitrogen by lumping all these different neighborhoods all over the county. I didn't have time to show you. There's a lot of differences depending on where you are, so spatial differences are important, not only temporal. And what you can see here is that for the first months, we had both the blue are the reclaimed and the red is septic. The reclaimed and septic have both pretty high average total nitrogen concentrations, around 6 to 7. And then we saw a dramatic change starting in the dry season. So this was something that surprised me. While I expected, probably a drop everywhere, they actually behave very differently. So we have reclaimed really went up in concentration as the septic went down. This was during the dry season. And then we had the big change here in February where they again switched directions. And this was right after the big rain event you probably remember that we had. So it made a big difference after the rain event. So what we can see here is that if we were out there and we just went and sampled once, and we ended up picking January to sample, our conclusions would be completely different than if we went during the wet season. So it's, again, looking at it through time. The sewer communities are pretty stable through here and well below the other two. And you can see the natural. This is your background. So if you ever want to see what is the background like, what does the natural sources look like, you can see they're well below all the other ones. Same type of format. I wanted to show you statistically data is both the reuse and the septic communities are higher than the other two, sewer and natural control. These little dots, I kept those on here. Those are called outliers, statistically significant outliers. So this actual real data that was measured and it was so high in some points in time that they showed up as outliers. So we had concentrations as high as 37 milligrams per liter in some of the septic communities and concentrations in the about 24, I think, in the reclaimed. Some pretty high numbers. Now phosphorus, what we saw in phosphorus is very interesting, is that the septic community is statistically significantly higher than all the others. So we have much higher concentrations for a while. We had one really high spike once, 3.4 milligrams per liter. But overall, every month, they really have been higher than all the other ones throughout. So less variability there. You can see the other ones. If I took this outlier, you could see that really much this would go much higher up than the other ones. You can see the ranges are much smaller in the other types of communities. The septic really ranges, but they're always higher. If you look at the boxes, they don't overlap at all. And I think that's what I wanted to show. And now, it's 9 months of monitoring. So taking too many conclusions out of 9 months of monitoring, especially when we saw how they changed, I want to put some caution in that. We do have, from the limited data that we have, that it appears both reclaimed and septic have higher nitrogen concentrations. And TP, total phosphorus, is highest in the septic community compared to all the other communities, and that how important looking at the seasonal variation. I am concerned that we're going to finish sampling in November, and we won't have another dry season to see, is this typical? Is this pattern typical that we see much higher concentrations of reclaimed because maybe it's so dry, people are still using a lot of reclaimed, but we have less rainfall to really drive the septic loads in, and that's why they diverge? Or, was this a unique thing from this 1 year? So I really think to be helpful to have more data than one season, one dry season. So, getting more data for specifically when we invested so much in installing these wells, recruiting these homeowners, and I can guarantee you it's very, very difficult to recruit homeowners to allow you to put wells in their yard with big equipment. It's been challenging in Satellite Beach to allow us to put, a push point that doesn't leave any permanent damage, and we actually bring the probes with us to show them, look, it's a 1/4 inch, it makes no damage, your turf grass is fine, but it's still challenging. So recruiting new homeowners to do something like this, again, would be very difficult. So I think that's all I had.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Listopd.
Along that
Appreciate
question
it.
of monitoring, I do agree. We've looked at other reports that have shown multi-years, and the years vary because of the different rain. 1 year, the seasons kind of go the same way. So this monitoring, it's done in November. Is there any discussion of continuing it since we already have the wells in place?
We will look at that.
Okay.
That'll be in next fiscal year, so in, putting together next year's
And that'll be
budget.
something that we'll see, that'll come to us in building next year's budget, or the plan?
It's part of the, $1 million of respond money.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, cool.
So I need to look at, everything else, but I think this is a high priority, so.
Thank you.
We'll have to, and some of that will definitely continue because some of these are in areas where we have septic to sewer projects planned. But we'll look at which of the state-funded areas we may need to pick up when that funding expires.
So like the sewer communities mostly are all funded by the state money because you're retrofitting the septic, but then you wouldn't have anything to compare to.
So do we have any projects in the areas where there's like a big spike, like some of those outliers? They were used like in the 40s?
I think so. I'm trying to remember all this. There were several spikes. There was
I know there was some.
And the
actually,
reclaimed area in Titusville, we have a project there. So
yeah, I've seen some of
There's
them.
probably some up north.
Yeah, I think some of the spikes in the septic, some were in Merritt Island, some were in Turkey Creek. And the Turkey Creek, it's city, so I'm not sure.
The state-funded study was $1 million, and that's our entire budget. We have other things we have to monitor, but continuing is obviously cheaper than initiating, so we'll look at what we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to have one more presentation before restroom break, I think, at least for me. Modeling Muck Toxicity and E. coli screening by Dr. Palmer.
Do you know which button's yours?
Sure, I'll figure it out.
All right, thank you. So you'll remember that this project study was paired with the toxicity work that Beth Falls with Orca also was doing and has presented. I'll leave it to you because I know you're in a hurry.
Thanks. Well, thanks for the opportunity to come here and talk a little bit about the one of the parts of the project that we've been doing. So we're going to I'm going to be presenting on our wrap up on the chemical side of the project that we've been doing, and there's a biological end that's going on right now. clarify, so our project goal is to determine the extent of human-sourced biological and chemical, what we call EOCs, emerging organic contaminants that are present in muck. And so our motivation for this is just a better understanding of what's in the muck for informing removal, storage, and disposal, and what pollution sources have legacy impacts on muck composition. So where we worked building on the work that Orca did, we went out and helped them collect their samples of muck back last summer. And we selected, based on their toxicity assays, we selected 30 sites that we were going to explore for basically what organic components and biological agents that are symbolic of human presence that might be there. And so we've selected these 30 sites. This is from a Google map where we've plotted the high and the low toxicity. So high circles are high toxicity for their microbial study, and that's sort of a proxy for how toxic that muck is. And then the green represents sites that are fairly non-toxic. So my range is there. So basically reds are killed about 100 to 75%, 75 to 30% is medium, and then anything less than 30 we consider fairly low toxicity. In most of the cases, if it's low toxicity, it actually means more like zero toxicity. But this way we can bin it in an effective way and kind of map it out. And you can see just at a glance, there's not necessarily a lot of correlation between specific sites and toxicity in that assay. So this is sort of the sources that Orca looked at, so total nitrogen, total phosphorus, carbon, temperature, dissolved oxygen. Right now, I'll just say that after this work that we're going to present today, we're now starting to look at sources of effluent and some wave dynamics because we have some interesting thoughts on where some of these things might accumulate in the muck. And it's kind of an interesting story for us. So EOC selection, so what are the species that we selected? So we selected 9 total. We selected ibuprofen and acetaminophen, chloramphenicol, which is an antibiotic, diazepam, which is a psychiatric compound, pravastatin as a pharmaceutical components there. Herbicides, we selected atrazine. We looked at sucralose, which is just sort of the standard wastewater loading marker, and then we looked at some personal care products, insect repellent sunscreens, and galaxolide. Right? So what we had to develop was a method where we could essentially sort of broad spectrum look for all of these at once. So our method was we take a sample of muck. We've been keeping them under minus 80 or colder Celsius. So they've been frozen since we collected them. We thaw them out. And then we begin a process where we mix them with organic solvents. So then we pull them away from the muck and from the water. Then we centrifuge it to remove all the particulate matter. And then we run it through what's called a solid phase extraction cartridge. And these are EPA-approved methods for monitoring contaminants. So that's our little setup down there. That's a picture from our hood. And then we concentrate them. And so the first thing we had to do was, can we develop a method where we could get all the organic contaminants out reliably? So this is just 2 pictures here coming off the mass spec in our working with our lab, looking at sucralose and acetaminophen. I'm forgetting there's a laser pointer here. Looking at sucralose and acetaminophen and ibuprofen. And so we purchased some standards for these. We actually spiked the muck samples, so we sacrificed one of the muck site samples to spike it with all these different contaminants to see if we can pull them back out through the extraction process. So we leave them in there for about 24 hours, so we let them set overnight, and we try and pull them back out. And sure enough, we can pull out sucralose, acetamin, and ibuprofen, and all of these other compounds as well. So we are able to actually put them in the muck for some period of time and pull them out. I will just right up front say we have not done any tests that are looking at how long the compounds are stable in muck. So that's not what we're looking at. We're just seeing whether or not we can put it in muck and get it back out of muck. And so then if we can do that, then we can look at muck sites and try and determine whether they're there.
I was curious, before you spiked them, did you do a baseline of those compounds as parameters to see if there was anything in there existing?
Oh, you mean in the purchased samples?
Well, no, not in the purchase. In the samples
muck?
that you spiked in the muck. Did you or do some
We've gone back and looked at that muck since then to see if there's anything in there. So we've run the standards by themselves. We had the spiked muck, and then we had a sample from the same container that we've also looked at.
Okay.
So, and some of it was there. All right, so I'm going to just kind of give the big picture summary here real quick. So if we break it down into our toxicity sites, so this is our high, this is our medium, and this is our low. These are our compounds. You can see that we hit for a few of these, so like ibuprofen and acetaminophen, atrazine, sucralose, DEET, BP3, BP4, these are our sunscreens. They show up in all of these. Now, before we get particularly alarmed about that, it's important to see the total number of sites that actually showed the hit, right? So things like ibuprofen and acetaminophen show up in most of the sites. Something like chloramphenicol shows up, but it's only in 2 sites, right? And so then there were several things that didn't show up in any of the sites. So in our 30, we didn't see any diazepam, pravastatin, or galaxolide. And so those products don't seem to be present. At least we're not able to see them in our study. So then the next question was, well, so does that toxicity correlate in any way with the presence of these EOCs? So can we take the ORCID data on the toxicity and compare it to our emerging organic contaminants and say, yes, these are going to be sites where the organic contaminants have some relationship? So this is just real quickly, it's a small table, but the purpose here is to show this is ibuprofen relative. So I've normalized all this basically to the highest concentration and scaled it down. And then sorted it so that we're looking at whether the toxicities are high, medium, or low. And you can see that the highest level of ibuprofen shows up in a high toxicity site. The next highest shows up at a low toxicity site. And it repeats like that. High, medium, low. There's no real correlation between the amount of ibuprofen we're finding at a site and the toxicity based on that assay. If we look at the levels of atrazine, just as an example, another example, the same is true. So there doesn't seem to be any correlation. In fact, in atrazine, the highest concentration of atrazine was at a low toxicity site. We can do this for all of the compounds. There's no strong correlation between toxicity from this ORC assay and these emerging organic contaminants. So that doesn't seem to be a driving force. So then we asked, well, what about the locations of these sites? Can we look at our high, mediums, and low and sort them to where they are located at? So here, a little bit hard to see, but here we've color-coded these multiple sites here between reds, which again are high concentration or high toxicity sites, medium toxicity sites, and low toxicity sites. And then I've just sort of referenced where they are in the maps. And so the M60 site is here in this little corner here. The M98 site is right out here. The M41 site is out here on the other side of the lagoon. And this M7 site is actually down near the bottom of the sampling area out in the middle of the water. And then this M76 site, I believe, is right here. So there's no clear immediate relationship between the EOC content that we're finding and the site where we're actually collecting the samples from. So one of the things that did come up, so if we go back to this table, we started looking for, was there any relationships between the sites themselves? And one of the things we found was that sites that have accumulation of one thing tend to have accumulation of more things. And so what I mean by that is if we look at like M60, so M60 shows up in the top 10 popular category here for ibuprofen. It also shows up in atrazine. And as an example, here are 5 sites that basically showed some amount of at least 5 or more of the things we were looking for. M60, 76, 19, 31, 98. So without going to the map, it just suggests that there are sites where accumulation is higher of multiple things, not just a thing. So what we conclude from that is that, yes, the muck does collect emerging organic contaminants. There are spots that have greater accumulation in the lagoon. That doesn't seem to be directly correlated with the distance from a potential house or an effluent site, right? And that's out of the 30 samples that we're looking at, right, particularly for these USCs. If we were to compare this to water samples that are in the same site, so we collected water samples to go along with our corresponding muck analysis, and we looked at 6 water sites. The content of these EOCs in the muck tends to be higher than what we see in the water column, but it's less than tenfold. So it's not substantially higher than what's in the water column. And so we think there's probably there must be a regular amount of exchange between what's in the muck EOC-wise and then what goes into the water column. So that's the EOC work. We have a little bit to talk about with regards to E. coli, but consideration of time, I want to know if you guys would like me to continue or if you just want to end with...
How much time do you need?
Oh, no, I'm more worried about your time. I can do this quickly.
How much time do we have on the clock, Carl?
On the clock, we have 4:40.
You're good to go. Oh, good. All right. So, actually, following up on the one last thing I would like to say here is that I also want to stress that this represents muck collection from a single, basically 2 or 3 week period. So, and that's over summer. So we have no idea about how this changes as a function of seasonality, and I'm almost positive it does. And so that's just for you guys to think about. So we also were charged with looking at certain pathogenic organisms or biological contaminants, and we so far have worked mostly on E. coli and coliform detection. And so just quickly, we're using a chromoselect assay. So basically, you take your bacteria, your cultures, streak it on a plate, and if you have E. coli, it turns blue, and if you have coliforms, it should turn sort of a salmon color. So I've just got right here kind of a representative plate, just because I'm used to showing people pictures. So this is E. coli if they're grown on just LB, which is our common lab media. Here's our fancy media, and they turn blue. And so we did this for the same 30 sites, and what we found was that if we tried to grow these up, we found no sign of E. coli or coliforms in any of these 30 samples. And so here what you see is these are the plates, and these blue spots you see is we actually did this test, and when no E. coli or coliform stains showed up, I said, you guys did that wrong. So they went back and they said, no, let me show you. And they spotted E. coli from the lab directly onto each of the plates. And the next day it came back and they had all turned blue. So the plates are working, so it's not that. We also put E. coli in the muck. I said, well, put E. coli in muck for 24 hours and let's see what happens. They pulled it out, streaked it on a plate, and the plate turns blue. So clearly E. coli are able to survive for some portion of time in the muck. So then what do we think is going on? Well, we think that the idea that there's no human or animal waste in the muck is probably unlikely. And so what we're doing now is thinking that long-term exposure might actually kill the coliforms. So hydrogen sulfide and E. coli are not super compatible. So there's a good chance that any place where we have high hydrogen sulfide concentrations or some of these other heavy metals, we might be killing the E. coli. So what we switched to now, and this is what we're going to be doing for all the remaining biological screens, is looking from a DNA perspective. So we've already started extracting DNA from the muck samples, and we've got a good success rate with that now. Now that we've optimized that method, we're going to go in and look genetically for whether they're there. So that will not tell us whether or not they're currently viable, but it will give us a fingerprint of whether they've been there. And that'll sort of be answering the question of were they part of the muck when it first arrived. And so that viability question is still a little lingering. If we had a little bit more time, we might be testing the muck to see if it actually would kill E. coli over a prolonged period. All right. Well, thank you for your time, and happy to take any questions you guys have.
So the studies that Dr. Treffery and others have done show that there's definitely a flux of nitrogen and phosphorus from the muck into the water column. And what you're saying is that your results are also showing a flux of these organic materials into the water column.
So I would say that I do not know I don't have confirmation of that. I find that there's material in the water column. I find some of those same compounds in the water column as I do in the muck. My assumption would be that, yes, they must flux up because there's no real driving reason when the muck gets kicked up that it wouldn't go out into the water column. But so that I don't have like labeled molecules, like I haven't radio labeled anything that could go up into the lagoon. I could be 100% sure of that. But it's a very reasonable assumption.
But it could be going both directions
Yeah,
too, right? It
almost certainly does.
There's got to be contributions coming in.
It had to get there
in
somehow.
liquid form,
Yes, absolutely.
soluble forms from somewhere. So there's an equilibrium.
It's an
that's
equilibrium,
established.
right?
Okay.
Absolutely.
Anything else? Oh, go ahead, John.
Yeah, the muck samples you take, how far down, how deep are the samples?
So I went out with Orca and sampled for one day, and most of those were about 6 to 8 inches deep, I would say.
Okay,
So in some cases where we had muck depths of 10 or 12 feet, I'm not actually sure One question I have not been able to get an answer to is necessarily what the rate of deposition is across the lagoon. So I don't think we know how much 6 inches actually represents from a legacy standpoint.
Yeah, and so when you take the sample back to the lab, you homogenize that?
Yeah. Actually, it was homogenized on, so they homogenize it the day that they collect. So they would take the different samples, homogenize, and then that's what we received.
Okay, and so it represents a mixture of the top, but you have no idea, you've already said you haven't gotten deeper into the muck, so you don't know whether any of these compounds are farther down. If we had more data from top, middle, bottom, you could see whether things are fluxing out or fluxing in.
Yeah. You'd also be able to, you'd be able to date those pretty effectively.
And one other question I had, or comment I had, you make it seem very simple to go out and analyze for these samples.
It's not.
Having done Muck, GCMS work in the past myself, I know how time-consuming it is. So when people say in the press or letters to the editor here in the audience, they come up with a new compound of the week and say we should analyze for this, would you agree or disagree with me that there are probably millions of organic compounds in nature?
Yeah.
So we could be, it would be actually an insurance policy for analytical chemists. If we could analyze for all these compounds, it would take forever.
Yeah, I will say that what I'm showing you are results for the compounds that we have standards for and can put in there and assign. We can say this shows up at this time on our device and has this molecular weight. This is what we get on our device when we run this sample. I can tell you that by looking at these that there's a whole bunch of other stuff that is in there. And, we've optimized specifically to look just for these, right? And these are markers of human influence, right?
And so measurements of nitrogen and nitrogen flux and trace metals are far less complicated than measuring trace levels of organic compounds in complex matrices like Muck. Would you
Have
agree?
we not done those? I don't know, but I would say probably yes, based on what I've seen.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want people to know how much it takes a tremendous amount of work to generate what Drew has presented here very quickly. It takes months and months and months of labor.
It takes about a day per sample.
Very expensive pieces of equipment.
Yeah. It's at least a day per sample to prepare it properly, because we have to have like a whole chain of custody to make sure we don't contaminate it with anything while we're going through it.
Thank you.
May I
Go ahead,
ask
Virginia.
one question? So there were a few things in the list of things you fingerprinted that are, 4 or 5 syllables long and sound scary. So were the levels that you found alarming?
No, not for I would say for none of these is the levels alarming. And even though they're a fold higher, potentially not even a whole fold higher than they are in the water column, none of those are particularly significant. So we can, to stress, the fact that we can detect them does not mean that they're at a level where they're biologically harmful or relevant.
And the reason that, some of these were selected is that septic systems are not good at removing most of these.
Yeah.
Sewer systems are pretty good at removing a number of these. And so by looking at different ratios, you can tell whether the signature that you're getting is more associated with septic or sewer or some other source.
Well, I look forward to giving you guys the biology story, hopefully by the end of summer. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. If anybody was going to complete or wanted to speak today, please complete a comment card during the break.